Hi Year 12, welcome to your CAT help video for this week. This week you've got your first attempt at a 20-mark question, and I'm going to therefore spend quite a bit of time talking to you about the principles of these 20-mark questions and also talk you through a bit of a plan or structure you could use in order to have a go at this one. I'll start by having a look at the question itself. So the question says to evaluate, that's the command word here, the importance of the human and natural factors affecting river discharge over time. So there's a few things that we want to be doing within our answer. We want to firstly make sure that we are going to be evaluating. Now, we think about what that command word actually means. Evaluation is all about coming to a decision, okay, or kind of weighing up the whatever it is the question's asking you to do. In this case, weighing up the importance of the human and natural factors affecting river discharge over time. So we want to think about making sure that we are presenting some kind of viewpoint. It's really important that in any 20-mark question, no matter what topic it's on, you are putting forward a viewpoint or an argument. Never get drawn in to lengthy descriptions or explanations of processes or events. You want to make sure that you are using your knowledge to put forward a particular viewpoint. So the first thing you might want to actually do is to think about where your viewpoint actually is. So if we think about human factors and we think about natural factors, we think about a little seesaw that sits between those two, okay, where would your seesaw tip? Would it tip more towards human factors being more important, or would it tip this way towards natural factors? Ultimately, you could argue this question either way. What's important though is that you pick a side before you start writing your answer. So just take a moment now and think about whether you think human factors are more or less important than natural factors. Okay. What you then want to do within your answer is to think about having a logical structure. So the first thing you might do within your response to this is you're going to want to have an intro, okay, a little bit of an introduction, and within that introduction you want to kind of unpick the key bits of terminology in the question. And I would say in this case that is, what do we mean by human and natural factors? And it's, what do we mean by river discharge? So the first thing you might want to do is to unpick the key terminology. So in this case, what is river discharge? How do we measure it? What does it show us? Okay, and very briefly name some human or physical factors that can affect river discharge. We don't need to go into explaining them yet. We'll come on to that. So we're going to give our intro where we're going to unpick the key terms, and we're also going to state our viewpoint. So we want to make sure that we're very clear about which of these two factors, human or natural, which one has the greatest influence. Okay, come out and say that right at the start. You then want to get on to the main body of your essay. Okay, this is where most of your writing is going to be done in this section. So I would, within this question, make sure that you have some awareness of both of these factors. So probably a logical way to structure this response would be to have a section on human factors and then follow that with a section on natural factors. Okay. Within these sections, you want to think about outlining not just which factors can have an influence, but you want to explain the influence that they have, and you want to try and support that with some evidence as well. So human factors, you might think about things like urbanisation, or you might consider the role of deforestation, or you might consider agriculture. And within your points about each of these things, you want to make sure that you are giving good explanations. So you're making it very clear how urbanisation or deforestation or agriculture is influencing river discharge. You want to have some evidence in there. So think about some of the examples and case studies that we've looked at so far and how you can use those within your response. And you also want to make sure that you are weighing up, okay? And do this as you go along. So rather than writing a point about urbanisation and then writing a point about deforestation and starting this point by saying, oh, and another factor is deforestation, oh, and another factor is agriculture, you want to use language like a more important factor is, or a less important factor is, okay? So you're weighing up as you go along. You're making it clear to the reader whether you think one is more important than the other within each of these human factors, okay? You might then do the same for your natural factors. So you might think about seasonal changes. You might think about geology. You might think about relief or soils. And again, within each of these, you want to be doing those same three things. You want to be giving clear explanations, you want to be using evidence, and you want to be weighing up as you go along. Now, it's also important that you are coming to a conclusion at the end of your answer as well. So the last thing that's going to be included is going to be a conclusion. Now your conclusion should be a summary of the key ideas. It doesn't need to be a repeat of the key ideas. You're not just going to rewrite what you've already written, but you want to summarize the main ideas. Okay, so perhaps pick out the most important human or physical factors. Okay, you want to make sure that you state your viewpoint again. So going back to what we wrote at the start of our answer, whether we thought it was human or physical, which way the seesaw was going to tip, that's important that we state our viewpoint again here. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that this seesaw should never be completely balanced. You should never say, oh, it's completely even between human and natural factors. You want to stick your neck out and actually choose a side. So make sure that you come down on one side or the other. However, don't come completely down on one side. So don't say it's completely human factors and natural factors have nothing to do with it, or completely natural factors and human factors have nothing to do with it at all. You want to show an awareness of both sides of that argument. The other thing that's really important within this question is this part here. Okay, evaluate the importance of human and natural factors affecting river discharge over time. Now it's very easy to write an answer about this bit, about the human and natural factors affecting discharge, but you want to think about that whole point of over time. Okay, so you may also consider, and I would do this as part of the main body of your answer, short-term timescales. So maybe again that idea of seasonality. Okay, and also kind of longer term timescales. So that might include things like urbanization and deforestation, or even climate change. Okay, so you want to show an awareness of how river discharge can vary in the short term and in the long term as a result of these factors. And you could argue that in the short term, that is being influenced more by one factor, and the long term is being influenced by another. That could be a consideration that you want to make. So thinking about whether human factors are going to have more of an influence in the short term or long term, are natural factors going to have more of an influence in the short or the long term. Remember to be dropping in your evidence and examples as you go along. That's really, really important. And in terms of the amount that you should be writing for a 20-mark answer, if you're writing it by hand, okay, the minimum that you should be writing is 2 sides of A4. Okay, absolute minimum of 2 sides of A4 handwritten. If you're typing it, which most of you will be because you'll be handing it in on Teams, 1 side of A4 is fine, but in a sensible size font. Okay, so your font should be 11 or 12 size, not size 18 or size 22, because then it's very easy to write a whole side. A side of A4 typed in that sort of font is what we would be expecting in this answer. Okay, so just to recap, main things that you need to do. You need to make sure that you are presenting a viewpoint. Lots of people forget to do that in a 20 marker. You must decide what you think before you start writing the answer. Have an introduction. Unpick the key bits of terminology. Tell me what your viewpoint is, and then get down to the main body of your answer. This should only be 1 paragraph. Okay, you can get everything you need to do here in probably even 3 to 4 sentences. Then on to the main body of your essay. This should be at least 2 to 3 paragraphs. Okay, the split of that might depend a little bit on whether you are arguing more for human factors or more for natural factors, but make sure you show an awareness of these. Remember that within each of your points about these factors, and you don't have to mention all of these, but within these points, make sure you are explaining, you're giving evidence, and you're weighing up as you go along. Remember that way of saying a more important factor is, rather than saying, oh, and another thing. Make sure you've also got a conclusion. Again, that should be a paragraph, not a sentence. Okay, so 1 paragraph which sums up the main ideas, maybe picking out the most important human or physical factor as part of stating your overall viewpoint. And remember, we should be looking to write around about a side typed or 2 sides handwritten. Come and find me if you've got any questions about this, but hopefully that gives you a good starting point for answering your first 20 marker.